There is a truth that hides in plain sight, yet it rarely gets spoken aloud, because to say it is to admit that something far more fragile than money is at stake. Poverty does not simply kill dreams, it strangles the very air from which dreams might have been born. It is not the thief that robs a child of a future already imagined. It is the slow erosion that prevents the seed from even touching the soil. When you are poor, the dream is not shattered, it is never allowed to crystallize into existence. This is not a drama of broken glass. It is the quiet tragedy of an empty room. We like to imagine dreams as stubborn, untamable creatures, the kind that survive storms, the kind that thrive in adversity. It makes for beautiful speeches, stories of people who rose from nothing, who clung to their aspirations like a drowning sailor to driftwood. And yes, such stories exist, but they are not the rule. They are the exception carved into our collective consciousness, precisely because they are so rare. Most of the time, poverty does not meet a dream in battle, it simply ensures the battlefield is never built. Imagine a night sky without stars, not because they were blown out, but because the air has been thickened to the point where no light can pass. Poverty is that thick air. It doesn't destroy ambition, it makes ambition unthinkable. A mind occupied entirely with survival cannot find the luxury of asking, "What could I become?" It is trapped in the narrow hallway of "How will I eat? How will I keep a roof? How will I keep warm?" The horizon collapses into a single point, and all light converges there. It is easy for those who have tasted opportunity to underestimate the architecture of possibility. We forget that the ability to dream requires a certain spaciousness inside the mind space that is not filled with panic, debt, hunger, or the constant hum of insecurity. A child who has been told, day after day, that their role is to survive, will not naturally stumble into imagining what life could look like beyond that. If survival is a cage, then dreaming is the flight of a bird, and birds cannot fly in a room with no ceiling, no wind, and no reason to believe that the sky exists. But the deeper cruelty of poverty is that it is invisible to those not living within it. Not invisible in the sense that people cannot see the poor, they can, often in great detail, but invisible in its mechanics, in the way it shapes the mind and spirit. A wealthy observer might say, they just have to try harder, as though the only missing ingredient is effort. But effort requires direction, and direction requires vision, and vision requires that your gaze be free to roam beyond the next meal. When your attention is chained to the present moment by the iron of necessity, your mind is no longer an open field. It is a small, windowless room. There is a metaphor I cannot shake, a locked library. In this library are the dreams, ideas, and futures one might have had, but the key to the door is not in your pocket, it is held somewhere far beyond reach, in a place where access is determined not by your desire to learn, but by whether you can pay the rent, whether you can feed your children, whether you can stay healthy in a system where even illness can bankrupt you. You are told that the library is open to everyone. You are told that dreams are free, but you cannot enter. You never even see the door. When I think about this, I recall the soft cruelty of well-meaning encouragements. Just believe in yourself. Dream big. Follow your passion. These phrases float easily through the air of classrooms and books and seminars, but they presuppose that the person hearing them is already standing on ground firm enough to plant those seeds. For the poor, belief without a bridge is simply a heavier burden. Passion without resources is a flame without oxygen. And yet, here lies the paradox. Poverty is not the absence of worth, talent, or intelligence. The poor are not empty vessels waiting to be filled, they are often brimming with resourcefulness, adaptability, and resilience born from necessity. But these qualities rarely translate into long-term transformation without access to that most precious and overlooked commodity, opportunity. And opportunity is not an equal birthright. It is doled out by systems that speak the language of capital, geography, and social connection. In the cosmic scale of human existence, poverty is a distortion field. It bends the trajectory of lives before they even take form. A child born into wealth may never realize how much of their ambition was simply the natural flowering of having been given sunlight, water, and fertile soil. A child born into poverty may never realize how many of their unexplored potentials were seeds that never even left the packet. In both cases, the dream is shaped not only by the dreamer, but by the invisible architecture surrounding them. And so, to say poverty kills dreams is to oversimplify. Poverty prevents them from being born at all. It reduces the vast horizon of what might be to the narrow slit of what must be done now. It creates a world where the very act of imagining is an act of rebellion, and where rebellion itself feels too expensive to afford. This truth is not meant to invite despair, but to illuminate the terrain. You cannot change a landscape you refuse to map. You cannot open a locked door if you will not admit it is locked. To see the way poverty shapes the mind is to understand why simply telling people to dream big is not only can be cruel in its unawareness. And yet, somewhere within the suffocating air, there is always the possibilities, small, fragile, improbable, that a dream might still ignite. And when it does, it is often not because the conditions were perfect, but because the human spirit, against all reason, still found a crack in the walls through which to see the sky. But such cracks are rare, and they are never the result of willpower alone. The question that remains is not whether poverty can be overcome. That is another conversation entirely, but whether we are willing to recognize that dreaming itself requires resources, that imagination is not free-floating in the human soul, but tethered to the realities of the body, the home, the community, and the world. At first glance, the statement seems almost cruel in its precision, as if poverty is not content with merely stripping the fruit from the tree, but also poisons the soil so that nothing might grow there again. We like to imagine that dreams exist beyond circumstance, floating like fragile seeds in the wind, landing anywhere, and somehow taking root. But the truth is, even the most resilient seed needs a patch of soil, a drop of water, a brief moment of sunlight. Poverty does not simply make the ground barren. It blinds the dreamer to the very possibility of planting at all. To understand this, we must first untangle the illusion we often repeat in motivational slogans, that dreams belong equally to all. On posters and in speeches, we hear that the poor child can dream as vividly as the rich one, that imagination needs no currency, that the mind is free even if the hands are tied. And yes, in the purest sense, the mind may wander anywhere, but what use is a map if the traveler cannot walk? In reality, the capacity to dream is not just about imagination, it's about having enough stability to imagine without the constant interruption of survival's demands. Poverty's cruelty lies not only in its scarcity of resources, but in its theft of mental space. The mind becomes consumed with the mathematics of existence, how to stretch the remaining coins for food, how to delay the rent, how to survive the next sickness without a hospital bill turning fatal. In such a mental climate, dreams feel like luxuries, indulgences that belong to someone else's world. You cannot build castles in the sky if you are always staring at the cracks in your rooftop. There is also a subtler truth, one less visible but equally corrosive. Poverty shrinks the horizon of possibility. When all you have seen is limitation, when every door you've approached has been locked, the brain quietly rewires itself to stop looking for keys. Opportunity becomes not just scarce, but unimaginable. It is not the death of a specific dream to be a writer, a pilot, a scientist, but the slow erosion of the idea that one could have any dream at all worth chasing. This is why poverty is not just an economic state, but an existential one. It governs not only what is in the pocket, but also what is in the realm of belief. And so, we find ourselves in a paradox. Society tells us to dream big, but the very scaffolding required to hold a dream in place, time, education, mentorship, even the leisure to reflect, is unevenly distributed. It's not that the poor are less capable of brilliance, it's that brilliance requires air, and poverty keeps the lungs underwater. The fire may still be there, but oxygen is rationed. The most devastating impact, however, is generational. A dreamless parent often raises a child not into a world of open fields but into a maze of walls already marked with no entry. When imagination is not modeled, when the possibility of more is never seen, it becomes almost radical for a child to envision a different life. And this is why the myth of the self-made dreamer is dangerous, not because it's entirely false, but because it suggests that dreaming from the bottom is simply a matter of willpower, ignoring the invisible architecture that holds some aloft while pressing others down. Yet even in this bleak landscape, flickers of possibility remain. Sometimes a story, a passing kindness, a random encounter is enough to plant the smallest seed of vision. A teacher who sees potential in a quiet student, a library that offers a doorway into other worlds, a chance moment of witnessing someone who made it despite the odds. These moments are like rare cracks in the concrete where a single flower dares to grow. Poverty tries to erase the conditions for dreaming, but human nature is stubborn, and hope, though fragile, has a way of surviving in shadows. Still, we must not romanticize this resistance. It is beautiful when a dream emerges from hardship, but it is not inevitable. For every seed that survives, countless others are crushed before they even sprout. To speak of dreams in the context of poverty without acknowledging this imbalance is to engage in a comforting lie. The truth, uncomfortable as it is that poverty wages war not against the dream itself, but against the capacity to ever believe you might deserve one. Understanding this changes the conversation. It shifts the question from why don't they dream to what conditions are needed for dreaming to be possible. It challenges us to see dreams not as purely personal triumphs, but as communal constructions, things we build for one another through support, education, and access. Dreams are fragile in the beginning, and if poverty is the storm, then society must decide whether it will be the shelter or the wind. And perhaps the deepest irony is this: the world loses as much as the dreamer does. For every vision that dies in the silence of survival, a piece of the human story goes unwritten, a song unsung, an invention unimagined. Poverty's theft is not just personal, it is collective. It robs not only the individual of their what if, but humanity of the future those dreams might have built. So the statement holds, sharper than we first realize. Poverty does not kill dreams, it kills the chance to dream. And in doing so, it robs us all. I often think of dreams as candles. Some burn brightly in vast, ornate rooms, safe from the wind. Others flicker on kitchen tables, surrounded by unpaid bills, each gust from an open door threatening to extinguish them. The wealthy may still lose their flame to despair, to disillusionment. But poverty's danger is more primal. It prevents the candle from being lit at all. In myth and literature, we often meet the figure of the dreamer, the one who imagines beyond their station, who sees a world that doesn't yet exist. But in reality, the dreamer needs tools, a lamp for the journey, a map for the path ahead. Poverty removes these tools and replaces them with chains. It is as though one is invited to a race where the starting line is the same for all, but some arrive barefoot and bound, while others begin already halfway to the finish. The metaphor I return to most is that of the locked garden. Inside are opportunities, fertile soil, fresh water, fruit-bearing trees. Those with keys enter freely, planting and harvesting as they wish. Those without keys may glimpse the garden through the bars, imagining what it might be like to belong there. But over time, staring at something you cannot reach can be more painful than never having seen it at all. Eventually, some stop looking. The garden fades from view, not because it disappeared, but because hope did. And then there is the river. Imagine it flows with possibility, skills to be learned, mentors to be met, spaces to experiment and fail without catastrophe. Those born near the river drink from it daily. Those far away must travel miles, carrying heavy buckets, only to find much of the water lost along the way. Some never make it. And so, when we marvel at those who emerge from poverty with their dreams intact, we are not seeing the norm but the rare swimmer who crossed against the current and survived. There's a cruel trick hidden in society's story about making it. We like to celebrate the rare flower that blooms in the desert as proof that deserts aren't so bad, ignoring that most seeds there will never sprout. The exception is turned into the rule, and the suffering of the many is erased beneath the success of the few. Poverty's most insidious effect is not visible in the survivors, but in the invisible majority, whose dreams never had the air to breathe. And yet, there is always the stubborn seed, the one that lodges itself in the smallest crack, fed only by rainwater that drips from a broken gutter, growing in defiance of its I think often about what makes such seeds survive. Sometimes it is sheer accident, a teacher's encouragement, a book found in a thrift shop, a fleeting glimpse of someone who reminds you that another life is possible. But I cannot help but feel uneasy when we call this resilience a virtue, as though deprivation is a test we should all be grateful to pass. In truth, it is not romantic to be forced into such a fight. A flower should bloom because it is its nature to bloom, not because it has battled wind and stone to exist. Poverty forces the dreamer to become a warrior before they've even had the chance to imagine what peace might look like. So when I hear poverty doesn't kill dreams, it kills the chance to dream, I see not just an economic reality, but a symbolic theft, the taking away of the mental, emotional, and spiritual spaces where dreams are born. It is like erasing the sketch before it becomes a painting, burning the sheet music before the melody is played, and we, as a society, lose more than we know. When I was younger, I knew a boy named Min. He wasn't the loudest in the classroom, nor the most naturally gifted, but he had a certain light in his eyes whenever we talked about space. He could name constellations without looking them up, tell me the history of every Apollo mission, even sketch planets with eerie accuracy from memory. One day, during a group project, we had to design a future city. Min's idea was to build it on Mars. He spoke about oxygen domes and underground farming, and for a moment, we all believed it could happen. His excitement was contagious. It made the walls of our school feel less like boundaries and more like launch pads. But as the years passed, something shifted. His parents' small repair shop began to struggle. Min started working after school, first part-time, then almost every evening. He began missing classes, assignments, entire weeks of school. I asked him once if he still thought about Mars, and he smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile at all. "It's not that I don't want to," he said, "it's just, my family needs me here. Mars can wait." But Mars never came back. He didn't fail because he wasn't smart enough. He didn't stop dreaming because the dream lost its appeal. Life simply didn't leave enough room for it anymore. Survival filled every corner of his mind. And so, without ceremony, the boy who once reached for the stars put his hands into the soil of necessity and stayed there. I thought about Min often. I wonder how many other Mins I've met without realizing it. People who might have painted masterpieces, written novels, cured diseases, designed bridges that reshaped cities. People whose potential never saw daylight because the sun of opportunity rose somewhere else. It's easy to tell ourselves that dreams are free, that anyone can have them. But I've seen enough to know that dreams, like plants, need certain conditions to grow. Time, space, nourishment, and poverty strips those conditions away, leaving the soil to dry for most seeds to survive. And yet, I can't let go of the thought that if Min had just one moment of reprieve, one scholarship, one mentor, 1 year without the weight of bills, maybe he'd be somewhere now, sketching a Martian skyline instead of repairing leaking roofs. Poverty is not a thief that storms into your life in the middle of the night and rips your dreams from your hands. It is slower, quieter, more insidious. It works like gravity, pulling you down inch by inch until you forget what it felt like to float. It doesn't burn the blueprint of your ambitions. It simply keeps you too busy, too tired, too burdened to look at them again. And this is the tragedy we rarely name out loud. When poverty takes hold, it does not just limit what you can do, it limits what you can imagine. Your thoughts narrow to the immediate, the next meal, the rent due, the medicine that can't wait. The horizon shrinks until all you can see is the distance from one day's survival to the next, and in that, shrinking possibilities vanish. But there is a truth, uncomfortable yet undeniable. We can't fight poverty only with charity, or only with speeches about dreaming big. You cannot plant seeds in concrete and then scold them for not sprouting. The soil must change, the conditions must change. This is where each of us, in some way, enters the story, because opportunity isn't a natural resource scattered evenly by the wind. It's a human creation. It exists where someone builds it. It reaches people when someone makes a path. And that someone could be you. Sometimes, creating the chance to dream is not about grand gestures. It's about giving time to someone who has none, tools to someone who has only ideas, space to someone who has been cramped into survival for too long. It's about remembering that before anyone can chase a dream, they must first be allowed to stand still long enough to see it. I think about men often, and maybe, as you listen now, you're thinking about your own men. Someone whose story could have unfolded differently, had the world given them even a narrow window to look beyond necessity. The question that lingers is not why poverty crushes dreams. We already know why. The real question is, what will we do, each of us, to loosen its grip? Because the truth is this: in every moment, we are either building a world where more people can dream, or we are standing by as those dreams evaporate before they are even born. And if we claim to believe in the power of dreams, then the only honest way forward is to also believe in, and fight for, the power of giving someone the chance to have one.